Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat.
Rock and roll music hit its prime in the 1960s, but so did war, destruction, political mistrust, and an almost constant civil unrest.
If you wanna dance with me.
That the torch has been passed to a new generation.
By
of
1964, America was in a state of confusion. We had escaped the isolationism and the blacklisting of the 1950s and replaced them with the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs fiasco.
I don't think old men ought to promote wars for young men to fight.
We had also entered into a space race with the Russians and were on the verge of a full-scale war in some place called Vietnam.
Each day the crises multiply. Each day their solution grows more difficult.
An eerie foreshadowing to many of the decade's darker moments occurred in November of 1963. President John F. Kennedy was killed by an assassin's bullet while on a motorcade tour of Dallas. 2 days later, the country paid the first tribute to one of its fallen heroes.
He pleased to bless this grave.
Crowds lined the streets of Washington and wept openly. A scant 3 months later, crowds were again assembling, this time in New York. Only now their grief had been replaced by screams of excitement.
They were just like 4 boys. I really liked them. They were good. They're great guys.
Their only tears were tears of joy. America had discovered the Beatles.
Change you. They're not what they used to be. They're just so much better. They're so much better.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand. P.S. I love you.
Beatle music had yet to become political. The 4 boys America fell in love with in 1964 sang simply about love. Whatever it was about them, they elicited a fan response that has never been equaled.
The day I do love. P.S. I love you.
While the Beatles were attracting most of the media and fan attention, folk singers like Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, and most notably Bob Dylan were beginning the mix of politics and music.
I've learned to hate the Russians all through my whole life. If another war comes, it's them we must fight.
Fighting soldiers from the sky, fearless men who jump and die.
By 1965, the U.S. was totally committed to Vietnam. The bloodiest war in the country's history was being stepped up. Before it ended, over 50,000 young men would lose their lives in a place few had known existed before.
Upon their chests,
Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution specifically provides that only Congress has the power to declare war.
At home, our leaders were divided on the issue of the war. We split them into 2 camps of hawks and doves and tried to make sense of the conflicting points of view.
War dragged out and dragged out. A defensive war is never won.
To the men that were there did not seem to be many contrasting opinions.
A day in Nam was surrealistic. A lot of confusion and a lot of negativity. It was just a matter of seeing people getting blown up and having this feeling that you couldn't do anything about it except protect yourself. We were concerned with survival, primarily, and you always worried about when you were going to be attacked. It was a very bad experience. People were angry because they were uncomfortable, and there were natural elements that we had to deal with, like bugs and leeches and snakes. So it was a question of being very lonely and being very insecure, not knowing why you were over there and what you were doing. There was a lot of apathy.
I have a dream that
Civil rights activists were conducting marches in Washington and Alabama, led by Martin Luther King.
Live out the true meaning of its creed.
Racial tension came to a head after the assassination of Black Power leader Malcolm X. In 1966, there were 43 separate race riots across the country.
Let me ask, does he don't understand that he's not to be to leave this building? Yeah! I think the consensus is that you're staying, sir.
The unrest that was thundering through the streets spread to the college campuses. Exemplified by the student takeover of Columbia University, colleges became less of an arena of academia and more of a stage of protests. Students demonstrated against everything from the Vietnam War to demanding a freer hand in determining their college curriculum. Their sentiments filtered past university walls, and soon thousands of young people everywhere took up the battle cry against what they considered the establishment. Their hair grew longer and their clothes more tattered. Blue denim jeans and brightly colored print shirts became their uniform. Winston Churchill's old victory salute became a symbol for peace. Another element of the peace movement was drugs. Dr. Timothy Leary urged students to turn on and drop out. Marijuana became almost as commonplace among teenagers of the 60s as a pack of cigarettes would have been in the 50s. LSD and other hallucinogenics gave birth to the dreamy, brightly colored world of psychedelics. Rock music demonstrated audibly what their audience had imagined visually in their drug-induced states. Teenagers now had music that spoke directly to them, as no other had done before. For better or worse, America's youth was making their voice heard.
For 4 years, this administration has had at its disposal the greatest military...
In the election year of 1968, Richard Nixon won his party's endorsement by promising an honorable end to the war.
This is a song for Matt Daly.
The violence that marked the Democratic Convention of Chicago almost overshadowed the party's nomination of Hubert Humphrey. Overzealous teenagers and overreacting police officers turned the convention into a riot scene.
Gentlemen, get the thing straight, once and for all. The policeman isn't there to create disorder. The policeman is there to preserve disorder.
The year 1968 was marked by two other incidents of senseless violence that preceded the Chicago Convention. On April 4th, Martin Luther King was gunned down on a balcony in Memphis. King's dream of peaceful protest had ended in tragedy.
I knew they had killed him.
I had saved this one opportunity.
Presidential hopeful Robert Kennedy delivered a touching eulogy, made all the more ironic by the elements of June 4th. While on a campaign stop in California, he became the second member of the Kennedy family to be assassinated.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible? Is that possible? It could. Is it possible, ladies and gentlemen? It is possible. He has not only Senator Kennedy. Oh my God.
5, 4, 3.
While the United States explored the new frontiers of space, their astrological rivals turned their attention to expanding their boundaries here on Earth.
Everywhere I hear the sound of Martin George.
Soviet Union's invasion of Czechoslovakia, combined with the U.S. escalated bombing of Vietnam, helped put a fitting cap on one of the most violent and destructive years in history. In 1969, the Beatles, who had produced some rather unusual fan reactions, were indirectly linked to a bizarre murder in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Charles Manson and his followers brutally murdered 9 people, including actress Sharon Tate, after having been influenced by the lyrics to the Beatles' song Helter Skelter.
By the time we got to Woodstock, we were
Music was again an influence that year, but this time in Woodstock, New York, and Altamont, California. Almost 500,000 people gathered at Woodstock to provide a new answer to President Kennedy's famous plea of a few years before.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam.
While Woodstock epitomized to many the peaceful sentiments of a rebellious generation, a similar event at Altamont produced very dissimilar results.
Now come on, mothers throughout the land, pack your boys off to Vietnam. Come on, fathers, don't hesitate.
The Rolling Stones concluded their tour of the States with a free concert designed to rival Woodstock. For security, the Stones hired the Hells Angels. But this time, there were no peaceful sentiments as the Angels stabbed to death one concertgoer and beat several others. A generation's enthusiasm of a few months before seemed to vanish, and Altamont ended the blockbuster concert scene as well as many's dreams.
Man on the moon.
We copy you down, Eagle. Listen,
Oh, jeez.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Others' dreams became a reality, however, on July 20th, when the United States landed the first man on the moon. While one generation was forced to re-examine its values and hopes, the hopes of another became realized with Apollo 11. And so we have the 60s, a time of long hair, short skirts, and man on the moon, of war, assassinations and riots, and flower children and love, a time when youth leaders sang loud and carried guitars and gave no indication of even ever having heard of Teddy Roosevelt. The television generation that demanded instant gratification but tried for years to cancel the 60s' longest-running series, The Vietnam War, which was given a featured spot each night on the 6 o'clock news. It was a time of idealism and disappointment, and a decade that defied easy capsulation. 10 years that sent men to survive in space but couldn't manage to let them survive together on Earth, left its mark in history as a decade that advanced and deteriorated society in almost equal proportions. It was a time to reflect on, with many events that might be better forgotten, but whose impact makes forgetting impossible and remembering sometimes painful. But what a time it was.